everyone is talking about AI and how it changes everything, our personal lives, our societies, and our economy. And you know my thesis on this whole thing. It is true that AI is changing everything. I call it AGI because artificial general intelligence effectively is here. But I think we shouldn't be victims to this entire process. We should be pioneers. We should seize the opportunity and do something great. Now, when it comes to doing great things, most people think in terms of, let's start a company. Let's build a little SaaS app. Let's do something to make a buck or two. That is great. But I think it's time to think a little bigger. And you know that I think thinking bigger has actually much higher returns for everyone. Because if instead of building an app and trying to sort or build a website and build a little agency or something, wouldn't it be much cooler to actually focus your entrepreneurial energies with other people who have great entrepreneurial energies on building something that actually matters? And what could that something be? Well, it could be, for example, a civilization. Not a random civilization, not like the Incas or the Roman Empire, but I'm talking about our civilization. I'm talking about what actually matters to us as humans, in very concrete terms. Because normally you have the startup crowd that says, oh, why don't you build a new web agency for mid-sized companies using AI or something? And then you have the little dreamers who say like, oh, in the future, there will be abundance and we don't need capitalism anymore. It's going to be beautiful. And it's like, dude, first of all, why? And second, what's your plan? And there's nothing in between. What about thinking about something big, but breaking it down into concrete steps that we can take? So we build a new world, we build a new civilization, but we do so as pragmatic pioneers, step by step, brick by brick, and component by component. So we kind of build startups, but these startups are not random. These startups add up to a new civilization that makes our lives better. Because if we can do that, we are not just entrepreneurs. We are not just investors. We are not just customers and early adopters. We are not just policy wonks. We are all of the above in a singular effort that actually targets ourselves. So in this video today, we are going to go into the master plan, because I've thought about this a little bit with your help in Pioneerlands. We have discussed this a lot. So here's the master plan, how I think we can make the pioneer civilization happen in very pragmatic terms and steps. And I want to start with the principles to have a little bit of a guideline here, how we actually approach this whole topic. And these principles, the number one principle is that in the age of AGI, everything can be engineered. And that sounds like a nice little sentence, but I actually mean it. And it's time to really let this sink in. What does it mean, everything? With everything, I literally mean everything. Do not think when I say engineering about some electric motor or like a little robot or even a software platform. When I say everything can be engineered, I'm referring to the famous reality engineering coined by Pioneerlands, where we use an engineering approach, not just for a specific physical item, but for reality itself. What does it mean to use an engineering approach? Well, we think like Elon. We think like an engineer. We start with, okay, what do we actually want? What is the reality, the actual, tangible, concrete reality that we want? For example, we want money, right? We want to make 30% a year for everyone on our capital. That's a concrete vision of the future. Or we want beautiful, large families for everyone who's in Pioneerlands. Okay. Or we want to be very healthy and maybe not die, or at least not today or tomorrow. We want beautiful food where we don't have to think about it, we just eat it and we are very happy, and so on and so forth. In the art of reality engineering, this is a whole different video. This is part of the Pioneer Academy, how we do that, but we can break that down into very concrete steps. You imagine something and you only imagine it, and you hopefully are right about how you imagine. That's the art of imagination. Then you build it, then you fail, then you learn what failed, and you reimagine, you rebuild, you relearn, and you keep iterating, and you persist, and then you win. Very simple. And the better we get at each of these steps and iteration, the better we can engineer everything. And of course, this is facilitated by the dramatic AGI improvements we see every single month now. Gemini 3 just came out, ChatGPT 5.1, Grok 4.1. This is advancing at an incredible speed and improves and empowers our reality engineering skills. So that's the first principle. And that's a very important principle because it allows us to set our sights a little higher than just doing a, marketing agency for mid-sized companies. We can actually now engineer the components of civilization. The second principle, we are pioneers, not complainers and whiners. What do I mean with that? Well, here we talk about capability. We can now engineer anything we want. Here we talk about attitude. And when I'm on X and we have all these discussions, especially when it comes to policy things and politics and civilization, people are just little whiners all the time. They say, oh, DC is so corrupt and Trump is a disappointment and the Democrats suck. And in order to have whatever better civilization, we need to have lower taxes and less regulations. So we need to vote for more Republicans, but they're all traitors, whatever. It's like, dudes, you don't build a civilization by pointing your fingers at problems you cannot solve. Like, we can't fix DC. Elon Musk failed in fixing this. We have to be pioneers. We do not fix things by engaging in stupid politics and doing some elections and primaries. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. Vote for the right people, get the dummies out, make it a little less corrupt. But this is a losing battle. We cannot win that battle. Pioneers build stuff. Think about the West, the Wild West back in the days. How did you build your town in Oregon or something? You didn't go to DC and lobby your way so they built the town. No, you just take your little plan wagon, go to Oregon and build it. And how do you build the town? Well, no one knows. You just start building it. You build the bank, you build the bridge, you chop down the trees, and you build the saloon. And then you make some whiskey. I don't know how, but they figured it out. So that's what pioneers do. They don't go back to DC and write an application. They would never have towns if they would have done that. Okay? So we have to put our little pioneer's hat on, say everything can be engineered. Let's not do dumb little startups. Let's aim a little higher and build the actual pillars and components of civilization. Let's be pioneers, not complain, but actually just boom, break it down into the next step and build it. And now principle number 3, very important. If we want to build something great like this, we need to be a little smart. Not just bold, not just great engineers, but also a little smart. If you have like an insurmountable crazy plan or obstacle to overcome to make your plan a reality, you need to learn to use force multipliers. What is a force multiplier? It is to do things smart with key levers and something that makes you infinitely more effective. Let me explain. For example, when you talk about your new civilization, you do not start with the governance infrastructure, for example, like, oh, how do we make decisions? How do we vote? How do we create a new government? That is the least of our concerns because it is the most complicated, the most cumbersome, with the lowest return on investment. For example, another thing that is much more of a force multiplier is to ask the question, what makes us rich? Right? Because if we are much richer, we can do much more things. So maybe in the grand scheme of things, the first thing we should be concerned about is getting a little richer, maybe much richer. Also, people want that. So if we have something that makes people very rich, they want that, we get more engagement, and we have more money. And once we have more money, we can do more stuff. A second thing that is, for example, a force multiplier is make ourselves smarter, better informed, better educated, less disoriented, less lied to. And you will soon see where this leads us to. The third thing is what makes us more effective, what makes us, also force multiplied again. If we are a better community, more aligned, more connected, more effective, and filter the people who join the community effectively. So I will get into the details in a second, but you understand where I'm going towards. We need to pick our battles and build the stuff that actually gives us the most leverage on the path forward and also the most fun and the most tactical wins. So this doesn't become a drag building that civilization, but gets very exciting. And I boiled this all down into 4 strategic steps. These are the 4 layers that make this thing work. And I will share these layers now with you right here. So what are these layers? Let's start. The first layer of our new civilization that we need to build as pioneers is capital. And why is it capital and what is capital? Capital basically means you have money right now or you don't have money. These are the 2 starting points, right? You either have money or you don't have money or you have something in between, a little money. And we need to make sure that you have more money and that I have more money and that every citizen in our little pioneer lands, that is very small right now, but not that small. It's growing fast. It has 4,000 people and we didn't even start really. So It's good, 4,000 people. We have 2 billion under management, roughly, between us, under self-management. So we have 2 billion in capital. We have 4,000 people. It's not bad. And what do we have to achieve? We have to make sure, number one, for Pioneerlands, if we want to succeed, that whoever joins Pioneerlands and whoever becomes a citizen just makes way more money than they did before. And we are already on this, right? On my other channel, we talk about Tesla, we talk about Bitcoin, we talk about MicroStrategy, NVDA, Max 7, Meta, Palantir. We understand stocks better than anyone else because we understand the underlying metrics, the underlying technologies, the underlying meta trends, underlying secular macro trends. We understand the Fed, and we understand more and more. We understand option strategies. This is still very messy and requires a lot of engagement, and we can definitely do things to make this much more seamless by creating our own financial products, for example. That's exactly what we're working on right now. But these are details. The first layer and condition of Pioneerlands, our first step, our first mission, what we have to get to is capital and financial sovereignty. We need to make sure everyone who joins Pioneerlands gets richer faster. Part of that is unlocking 30% per annum return for everyone. I think that should be the new benchmark that we can work towards. Another part is giving the people who don't have capital better jobs. That's the other side of the economic and capital coin. We need to get people to that critical threshold. I have another video coming up where I talk about the critical thresholds in Pioneerlands. When are you financially a sovereign? When are you independent? The number is much smaller than you think, by the way, when you put the 30% on it. That is the first layer, and that is the first mission. And I will, in a second, go into some breakdowns per layer. But what is number two? Well, guess what? Once you have enough capital, and a lot of you who are watching, you have enough capital, right? You don't have to work. You are doing investments. I know many of you, so we know what to do. We do our investments, mostly in tech, in AGI-related tech. We learn from each other. We get better by the day. Many of you had years where you vastly exceeded 30%, but then there were some bad years. Let's assume you have achieved financial sovereignty or on your path, and even before. What is the second most important thing after having financial sovereignty? We need to achieve mind sovereignty, okay? This is very important and very misunderstood. And we as pioneers have to understand that the second layer of civilization is media. Media is of tremendous importance. Media is effectively the mindware that we upload into our minds or download, whatever. It is news, it is education, and it is entertainment. And in the future, in our civilization, we need to be in control of all three. In control means we cannot feed ourselves with dumb lies. Because if you get fed dumb lies, if you read the New York Times, for example, or even watch Fox News, or worse, MSNBC or CNN, all that stuff, you're constantly feeding your brain with synthetically constructed lies. Some of it is true, which makes it even worse. Some of it are total lies. They're not randomly created. They're created on purpose to make you do things that are not in your interest by all kinds of different people. So news is very important. That's why YouTube is exploding. That's why people watch my channel. That's why people watch the other Tesla channels. That's why so many people watch Joe Rogan, like all over the place. Why X is exploding, because people are not that dumb and they understand, well, if you watch random YouTubers or influencers, maybe they're very opinionated. Maybe they tell you sometimes the wrong stuff, but at least they don't do it systematically to exploit and destroy you, which is what the mainstream media does. Okay, so on the news side, it's very clear. We need good, high-quality news that doesn't disorient us, but actually informs us. On the entertainment side, Disney, Netflix, and so on, don't get me started. You all know the problem. Wokeness, viruses, all kinds of stuff. You are being fed a diet that is so toxic, I can't even start to explain. And different from news, where you get fake news and get disoriented in politics, but even in economics, entertainment is even worse. Because most people think entertainment, oh, this is just fun, right? The news is more important than entertainment. That's what people think. Because the news, I want information, and if they lie to me, I get the wrong information. That's pretty bad. Well, you're right, it's pretty bad. But you're wrong in assuming getting fake news is worse than getting toxic entertainment. Because entertainment is much more than entertainment. Entertainment is fiction. And what is fiction? Fiction is so much more important than non-fiction and facts, because fiction tells you who we are. Fiction tells us where we came from. Fiction tells us our identity. And fiction, most importantly, tells us where we will go and where we want to go. So the world of what is called entertainment and fiction is the world of narratives. And when you think about it, narratives are the most important thing in a civilization. With toxic and deadly narratives, you believe you don't have a right to exist, you believe life is bad, you believe everyone is a degenerate. If you have the right narratives, you believe in the future, you're excited about it, you're proud of who you are, you want to protect other people who are like you want to build something great, and you see future realities that are desirable. Great fiction makes us develop great identities. It makes us get the confidence, the hope, the excitement, the inspiration to take on the future. So to say this is a little side business that we leave to some insane Disney people is a bad idea. It might be the worst idea of all. So we need to seize control of that stuff too. And then finally, the third piece of media is, of course, education, where you have a mix between the two previous ones, but in a much more intense way. You have schools, you have high schools, you have colleges, universities, and you have adult, education. When I say the second layer of our civilization needs to be media, why is media so powerful and so important? Because media allows us to actually build all that stuff. It allows us to have the right information. It allows us to be actually entertained and inspired and visionary and have an identity that is productive. And of course, to systematically educate ourselves, our youth, to do what needs to be done in Pioneer Lands. The idea that we can pass on that area and let other people decide what gets fed into our brains is not a good idea. And the good news is everyone knows that. And the good news is that the media business is kind of easy to get into. And there are other good news that, for example, capital and media are connected. Because if you have capital, you can build media. But if you do media right, you also have much more capital. So you see, these are force multipliers of extreme proportions. And media also allows us to get coordinated. Because if we all watch the same media and we have control over this media, we have control over what we feed ourselves, we need total control and collective governance over the diet we feed ourselves. We could engineer this diet so we become more effective. We can unlock effective mindware. So that is the second layer of civilization. By the way, there will be a different video that explains how these layers can interact and how they're actually mutually dependent and create amplification loops if we do it right. What is the third layer? Once we have capital secured, we're all rich, media secured, we all are smart now. The third layer is, I just call them cities. But what do I mean with cities? Of course, I mean cities with cities, but I want to be more specific. I'm talking about social sovereignty. Social sovereignty means if you go out and leave your house, are you surrounded by amazing people? Probably not. Sure, you have some good friends, maybe. Maybe you have some smart colleagues. Maybe you have a nice family. But overall, your city, do you feel like this is my city, this is my pioneer civilization? Everyone thinks about the future. Everyone engineers great stuff. Probably not. And even if you think maybe you're happy and live in Palo Alto or something and you think, oh, it's pretty close to this. No, you have no idea what it could be. Of course, there are some dense areas of entrepreneurship somewhere in Silicon Valley maybe, but is it really your people? Is the density really what it should be? No, it's not. And what these cities do, it's not just about people and inspiration and doing great stuff. It's also about families. It's about friends. It's about the experiences we have. Like, in order to understand the meaning of cities, we need to take a step back. And what I really mean with city is your life reality. What do you experience every day? How do you go through life? And not in the sense like, oh, you need to have self-development and change your mind. I'm not talking about your mind. That is number 2 here. With number 3, I mean the opposite of your mind. I mean the actual environment you live in. The opposite of your mind, the outside of yourself. Is that really optimized? And I will go in a second for each of them into more specific things. Once we have capital and we have the media and we fixed our cities or built new cities, of course, there's a fourth and final piece of the equation. In order to have a real civilization, we need a state. Now, that can be misunderstood a lot. I'm not talking about switching out the US government or something. This is a parallel state. More specifically, an orthogonal state that doesn't even interfere much with the current government. It's a state where we self-govern these things. Because, as we will see, in pioneer capitalism, that's a little different from mercantile capitalism. We build all these things together, benefit from that, but also introduce governance, which actually feeds the business models dramatically. But that governance needs to be coordinated. For example, capital, we shouldn't develop capital products, charge a bunch of fees to the pioneers so someone else can get rich. That's very dumb. This should be fed back into the system so we all get rich. Media should not be a board with a CEO controlling the media, then getting bribed by Pfizer or GM and telling us dumb stuff. We need to be the board. We need to be the board. We need to understand what narratives do we actually, foster and cultivate for ourselves. What frames of news? How do we pick information? What is the governance for that? And who determines that? The state should determine that. But we are the state. Our state, us, should determine that. And the same with the cities, of course. So don't confuse this with the US government. This is about an orthogonal system of self-governance that we have to build. And that can be very different from what you think a state is. For example, this is not top-down. This is bottom-up. Each citizen stands on the top, and the state is a servant to the citizen, a service provider. But we need a bunch of services. Okay, let's break it down, because this is the master plan after all. What does it actually mean in concrete terms? It means, for example, we are working in pioneer lands. We just kicked this off this week. I have worked on it for a little while now, so we are ready to more collectively engineer this on pioneer bonds, which is a conceptual new product that basically takes the returns from the age of AGI, Tesla, NVDA, Palantir, MicroStrategy, all that kind of stuff, and turns it into a more stabilized, at least that's the conceptual design plan, into a more stabilized return of around 30% per year as a bond. Has a lot of tax advantages, smoothens out the return curve, and would allow the citizens of pioneer lands to just reap in 30% a year. That would be the vision, right? And there are lots of little things we need to engineer now. For example, we need to figure out taxation in all the different countries that are relevant to us. We need to do certain things to make this all happen. And when this actually becomes a product, we need to become compliant and, do all kinds of things. So we are all engines running into the pioneer bonds. I think it's tremendously important to have a capital infrastructure where everyone makes 30%. And that's not even hard nowadays, if you understand the age of AGI. But it's maybe too hard for everyone to do it individually. And by having a more systematic approach, it can also be tax efficient, which is kind of important for your actual returns. Another important thing is pioneer jobs, right? So we have to think very pragmatically. We need to build pioneer lands in a way where you just make more money. You either make more money on your capital or you make more money through new pioneer jobs. And the vision for the jobs is very simple. We actually have a bunch of jobs now in our career pages. The idea is that these jobs actually are not random jobs. They work on very strategic things. And this is all very early stage, all of this stuff, right? We are doing this together and we are figuring it out. I'm just telling you what needs to happen and where we need to get to. On the bond side, what needs to happen is 30% for everyone every single year, as tax efficient as possible for each country. Depending on the rules and the laws, it's different for each country. But there are all kinds of things you will be very surprised once you understand the taxation situation. And we are not just talking, we are talking about the entire situation we are optimizing. Here we are reality engineers on the bonds, for example. For example, did you know that capital gains in the United States are basically tax exempt all the way up to $62,000 a year if you have no other income? Very interesting stuff. You can basically be financially independent if you don't work just on capital gains and pay no taxes. Did you know in Sweden you can actually buy stocks and bonds if they're publicly traded and never pay taxes on any gain with no cap or limit if you pay a wealth tax of under 1% on your assets? Crazy, completely tax-free. So people don't know these things. It's very important that we discuss it and people can actually optimize their financial strategy with it. And then also develop products that take advantage of that and boost these returns. Jobs. The job situation, I think, in the future will be very different. We are working on an economics model for pioneer lands that will lift young people straight into financial sovereignty during college. So if you're American, you go to college and they just trick you into enormous amounts of debt. So you go into college and you come out with $200,000 in debt. Maybe not anymore because no one does that anymore because young people smarten up to it. But until very recently, that's how it worked. The vision for Pioneerlands is you go into the Pioneer Academy instead, and instead of coming out with $200,000 in debt, you're coming out with $200,000 in assets. Wouldn't that be better? And why? Because you're not sitting there like a passive little consumer and listen to some really dumb stuff some professor says, but you're getting an instructor. You're actually being put on jobs in Pioneerlands to build the future. You're learning how to build this stuff. And in 4 to 5 years from high school, from last year high school to graduating from the Pioneer Academy, you went through multiple projects that actually generated yourself $200,000 in total assets. Why 200,000? Because that is the critical amount where you are actually free. I will go into this in a different video. Why? Not free in the sense that you can retire, of course, but free in the sense that you can really focus on building great things. So the education of the future should have 2 goals: to prepare you for being a pioneer and to make you financially independent. That is the point of education. Because the future education is training to become a reality engineer. And when you train to become a reality engineer, you should generate enough value that you are financially independent when you complete the training. That is a vision we can all believe in because it's true. On the media side, I explained this already, so we are going to skip it a little bit, but it's about building new entertainment, news, and education, and to have governance over that. So we are not feeding ourselves some insane stuff. And we understand the true nature of media as mindware. This is the software your brain runs on. You can't just consume this crap out there. It's toxic and dangerous. And we need to actually curate our own stuff, which is beautiful from an economics perspective, because that is an insanely huge market. And we are in the middle on education with the Pioneer Academy. We are in the middle of news on pioneerlands.tv and my channel Joe Bhakti on YouTube. This can now expand infinitely. But on entertainment, very interestingly, think about what we now enter into. The age of AGI, but also Grok, Imagine, and all these amazing things. Entertainment will fundamentally change in 2026 on a massive scale. Everyone can do movies. Everyone can do the coolest stuff now. And so that shifts everything from needing a lot of capital, needing producers, needing all these connections, to you don't need anything anymore except for good ideas. And I would add to that, ideally, a larger civilizational frameworks in that these ideas can breed and foster and being created. Because what is more powerful than a great idea for an entertaining movie or entertaining TV series or YouTube series or a comic, whatever? I tell you what, an idea that is entertaining, but that also gets the approval stamp of the pioneer state, which is all of you and me. Because if you get that approval, you automatically get 80,000 viewers, our followers. You get distribution. That is the magic of this whole thing. You start to understand what I'm saying. If we are all the producers of our own stuff, our own capital products, our own media products, we automatically solve the biggest problem in business, demand, because we are the demand. So if we become the state, we stamp things, say this financial product is approved by us. This movie is approved by us because it follows what we actually want to convey. We want to inspire, have an optimistic future, and see amazing things happening and not violate our history and everything. So once you get the stamp, you get 80,000 viewers and all their friends, of course. Same with the financial product, same with the news product, same with the education product. If we produce for ourselves, we already won before we even started. We just have to be disciplined and transparent to ourselves. See where this is going? The cities. Capital is great. This is a $10 trillion opportunity. This is probably a $1 trillion opportunity. Cities are completely unlimited. Because now you're talking about housing, real estate. You're talking about health, healthcare. You're talking about food. You're talking about everything that is social. You're talking about a completely new economic vertical, one of the greatest ever invented that wasn't invented yet, family. That goes from dating all the way to financial management of family, all the way to, of course, kids, which ties into education, all kinds of stuff. Once you are in the civilization, engineering, capital mode, it's beautiful. This is just the best thing ever. And then, of course, experience, which is kind of the city itself. Like, how do we want to make these things look like? And this sounds maybe a little ambitious, but if you're in real estate, you understand how powerful it is. Imagine we have 80,000 followers. Soon we will have 100,000. Then we have 200,000 followers. Probably in 2026, we get to probably 200,000 across the different channels. Imagine you're a real estate developer. You have 200,000 people out there who want what you have, who want to move into your city. And of course, some are in Europe, some in US, some in Canada. Who cares? We have enough people. You build a little city. You build a 400 people city, 500 people city, which is very cute and optimized for all of this stuff. A little experimental. It's a pioneer town, right? But suddenly everything is perfect. All the people are cool. We only do cool stuff. You get perfect food. Your housing is optimized for everything. Health is included. Amazing experience. You have little parks. You have little statues. If you can build a statue of some cool pioneer, boom. Everyone moves in. Everyone pays 20% more rent than the market average. Imagine this is a real estate business, but it includes food, for example, a little bit food if you want dinners or something. Boom. Because you have the demand and we have the capital. So then it gets very real, and the cities will feed the media, because what is cooler for entertainment and news than having your own city and running the future? This is what I call force multiplication. And of course, capital sits always as the foundation of all these things and makes sure these are all great economic machines. Finally, the state, very simple. We have the pioneer operating system. So that's what I mean with state. A good state is a service provider. Okay, with not much power, by the way. State sounds so powerful, but it's more like service providers. Like you get the stamp is just boom. Otherwise, the pioneers don't trust you. The pioneers trust their own state because it's well governed by themselves. So the state checks like, is this media really good? Okay, boom, you get your stamp. Pioneer operating system, we already have it. Go to pioneerlands.net. You can sign up. We will have more and more apps on this thing. Wealth app, health app, networking app, all kinds of stuff. We have a little here. This is not important right now, but we have central coordination. Someone has to oversee everything. We have the Pioneer Assembly where we can vote. This needs to be built, but easy peasy. And we have the Wisdom Council in case we have to figure something out. There should be some people assigned who just tell us what's right and what's not right and having clear argumentations. So that's my vision of the Wisdom Council, by the way. It's kind of the Supreme Court without the Constitution. So in an intelligent world with intelligent people, you don't need a constitution because things are kind of obvious. You just have to think them through, and someone needs to be in charge of thinking them through and presenting it to everyone. It's like, okay, we thought about it deeply. Here's our assessment. Do with it what you want, but we produce some wisdom. And once you have wisdom, everyone sees like, oh yeah, that's makes sense. The federation, long story, but I think these little states will actually be not too large. You don't want them to be large. You want them to be sitting on each city, maybe a cluster of little cities that make one state or one kind of local government that looks at itself and makes sure everyone is happy and figures out if people are not happy, what's going on, how we fix it. And then, of course, you connect all these things into what I call a federation. But that federation, the more abstract it becomes, the less power it has to have. So it becomes more and more a complete optional service layer. But of course, the more we can coordinate, the better it is. You have host relations, my favorite word. And that takes us more into the whole state theory of the pioneer state. These are all things we should not worry about right now. If we don't get the capital, the pioneer bonds, and the jobs done, don't worry about the rest. If we don't then get the media done, don't worry about the rest. Then we sink our little pioneer teeth into the cities because that's where it really starts working. And in the end, we do the little state. Because people always jump to the state because that's the least accountable thing. And then, everything is stupid. Force multiplication works from the bottom up. Capital is the greatest force multiplier. Media the second greatest. Cities the third greatest. And then only the state as the fourth. But host relations means, of course, once we are coordinated, we have a lot of capital. Every pioneer is much richer than the average American or European because we are much smarter. We are doing something much cooler. We are much better aligned and coordinated and informed and inspired because we have actually our own media. And we are more happy because we have our own cities. Then we can deal with what I call our host nations, right? So if you're in Germany and there are some idiotic laws or something, it's like, oh, you can't build your city here or whatever. Or you're in the United States and whatever, the IRS starts saying, your bonds, we want to tax them. We have an extra tax invented now for your bonds. And we say, no, that's not okay. Then we have something called host relations here. Then now we are going into the future. But of course, if we all get together then, let's say we are Americans, just to take one example, the IRS gets nasty because someone pays them to attack our bonds or something on some tax question. It's like, we don't agree. We want something else. Then we can activate the host relations and say, dudes, that's a bad idea. You can't do that to us, and push back. So here we can now have coordinated lobbying and knock all these stupid little problems out. This is how Pfizer does it and all these people. But we would be the good guys. We would be organized and effective and can actually work on our host relations to make sure the politicians are not doing stupid stuff to make sure the administration is not doing stupid stuff, we now have the world's most powerful lobby. Of course, we don't want to get into the dirt all the time on that front, but if we have to, we need to win. Very important. And then we have more stuff up here. I don't want to go too deep into all that. The wisdom feed. We need to make sure we can actually collectively make smart decisions. That's a whole infrastructure that needs to be invented. How do you do that? How do you make people who are actually more engaged about a topic and better experts? How can they have more say than the rest? And how can you make sure that happens for each specific topic? And how do you make sure this is automatically, crowdsourced, organized? These are the governance questions of the future in an empowered, self-governed situation. So you see where this is going. In total, this is an orthogonal system, just to make sure no overthrow of governments here. This is completely independent, compatible, and just capitalist organization of our freedoms, where we do what we actually want to do, what's best for us, but we build it in a force multiplication layered approach. Capital, foundation, then media, then cities, and then we can deal with this stuff. So that is the big overview over the master plan, how we get from here to Pioneer Lands. Now it's all about breaking this down into operational problems and getting wins through the door. And I tell you, the wins are bonds, the Pioneer bonds, because that makes us money, all of us. Jobs, because that makes everyone who doesn't have money, and fuels our ability to build all these things. And then on the media side, news in our 2 YouTube channels and on X, and the Pioneer Academy, of course. So bonds, jobs, news, education, that is the 4 pieces right now that are in the works. Over the next few months, we'll see a lot of progress, especially on the bonds, while the education and the news, of course, are exploding. You are watching this channel. Of course, a lot of things are happening. And all of this lives through you guys, the community. We need to get on it. So we are going to organize this more and more on pioneerlands.net in our community, in the forum, to actually allow everyone to contribute to this so we can get it done faster. And that's what I mean with being a pioneer. Instead of complaining and whining about AI and the jobs getting lost, and the politicians being stupid, and the countries going down, and the borders being open, whatever, that's all true. And Ukraine and Gaza and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying to ignore everything. We can deal with it. We can make the right political decisions. We can stay involved. But all of that stuff is extremely marginal compared to this stuff you're seeing here. Because this stuff is going to change actually our lives and actually our civilization. Building is always better than complaining. I hope that was interesting. We have much more of that stuff coming up. Go to pioneerlands.net because that's where the future happens. See you very soon.